It's been a whirlwind week, and we have lots to talk about. By now, you've probably heard plenty about the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago, home of former President Trump. But that's just one of several criminal investigations into Donald Trump and his allies. Now, the former president has been involved in civil suits in the past, but these would be the first time he's faced criminal proceedings. And it's getting hard to keep track of them. So today, we're going to break them down for you and dig into some of the latest developments. Let's take a look. There's the Department of Justice criminal investigation involving the classified documents found in the former president's Florida home. The Department of Justice is also looking into what role Trump played in the January 6th insurrection and alleged attempts to overturn the 2020 election. Then there's the investigation into potential election interference in Georgia after the 2020 election. Fulton County's district attorney is looking into allegations President Trump tried to pressure the Georgia Secretary of State to overturn the election results. And now his attorney, Rudy Giuliani, has been named as a target in that investigation. And Senator Lindsey Graham has been called as a witness to testify before the grand jury. There's also the New York Attorney General's criminal probe of the Trump family real estate company involving alleged tax fraud. Now, that's where Trump was deposed, and he took the fifth more than 400 times. And Trump's former chief financial officer is soon expected to plead guilty to criminal charges in a Manhattan tax case involving Trump's businesses, according to NBC News. Allen Weisselberg could face several months in jail. So with all of that, I want to bring in my panel to make it make sense. Betsy Woodruff-Swan is an MSNBC contributor and national correspondent for Politico. And Glenn Kirshner is an MSNBC legal analyst and former federal prosecutor. Okay, folks, I laid it all out. Let's start with the latest all on the Mar-a-Lago search. Now, media outlets, including NBC News, they've been asking to see the affidavit that led to the search of Donald Trump's home. Now, that affidavit was written by the Justice Department. And as y'all know, it lays out the reasons it wanted a warrant to search Mar-a-Lago in the first place. The Justice Department, though, has now asked a judge to keep that affidavit sealed. The judge has ordered a hearing this week to let federal prosecutors and others, argue their cases about whether it should stay sealed. But we know the DOJ has told the judge if that affidavit were made public, it would hurt the, quote, ongoing criminal investigation. Betsy, okay, this sounds like this answers the question about whether the government just wanted its records back. By reading the response to the motion, it seems as though the Justice Department says they are pursuing a criminal case.
That's right. DOJ is reiterating what was clear from that search warrant, which is there's a criminal investigation underway that involves what FBI agents believe is evidence of a crime that was at Mar-a-Lago until they executed that search warrant there. With a search warrant, the documents that have become public is basically the outline. It's kind of the skeleton of the justification that the Justice Department had for executing this search warrant, but it really doesn't give us any of the nitty-gritty details that would show why exactly FBI agents and then a federal judge were persuaded that there was probable cause to believe there was evidence of a crime at Mar-a-Lago on the day that the search warrant was executed. That said, people really shouldn't be holding their breath in hopes that this affidavit will come out anytime soon. In general, as a typical practice, these types of affidavits, which are usually sworn statements from FBI agents or other law enforcement investigators, don't become public at least until criminal charges are filed, and often not until a federal investigation itself has completed. The fact that the Justice Department is saying that the release of this affidavit anytime soon would undermine a criminal probe is the kind of argument that the judge who's in charge of making this decision is likely to take really seriously.
All right, well, we will be watching that. Okay, so along these lines, let's talk about the warrant for a second, because we now know that it took Attorney General Merrick Garland weeks to decide whether to approve the request for a search warrant at Mar-a-Lago. And here's what a Wall Street Journal reporter who broke the story actually told MSNBC about that. Take a listen.
He met with Justice Department officials and other FBI officials for weeks in private meetings, weighing the ins and outs of such a high-profile, politically sensitive move. He does not want to make any sort of misstep that is going to be then, allowing the case to be questioned in court.
Glenn, you're the expert here. What do you think of Garland's approach?
I think when we're talking about matters as grave and consequential as executing a criminal search warrant on the home of a former president, which may ultimately culminate in a criminal indictment of a former president, you really need to spend a lot of time strategizing to figure out, okay, if we're going to do this, it needs to stick. We need to be as bulletproof as possible. So, you've got prosecutors who are in the he who hesitates is lost camp and prosecutors who are in the look before you leap camp. I think Merrick Garland is looking and looking and looking before he leaps. But when he takes that leap, and he has already taken one giant leap by having a search warrant executed on Trump's Florida home, he wants to make sure that he does it right. I think we will be well served in the long run. Simone, the only concern I have is that our democracy still seems to be on fire. So I think he needs to move toward criminal charges as soon as is feasible.
So let's just say if Garland does charge the former president, this is really different territory for him because he's really used to civil cases, and his tactics of posting on social media and going on Fox News to complain, those are not things that work well in a criminal trial. So, Glenn, along those lines, what would that kind of trial look like?
I don't think the president, if charged, will have much of a defense to mount. We now have two sort of enormously consequential, at least two, possible areas of criminal liability. You've got everything surrounding January 6th and Donald Trump's attempt to overturn the election's results. And we now have this really dramatic investigation into Donald Trump and his associates, let's call it what it is, unlawfully taking classified information from the White House and whisking it away to Mar-a-Lago. And that, has serious national security implications. And when the warrant was unsealed, we see that there are 3 criminal charges being investigated, none of which require these documents to have even been classified. So Donald Trump's claim that he thought they were declassified in his mind, so they magically were, that dog won't hunt as a defense at trial. So I think once indictments begin to appear, boy, Donald Trump is going to have a really rough time coming up with a plausible defense.
Okay, so that is the Justice Department's criminal investigation as it relates to these documents. But Betsy, you broke a story about the Justice Department's investigation into January 6th. And your political piece reports a federal grand jury has now subpoenaed Trump White House lawyer Eric Hirschman for documents and testimony. Folks know Eric Hirschman from, the greatest hits that he gave us at the January 6th trials, for lack of a better term. So what can you tell us about this new reporting you have, Betsy?
Yeah, that's right. Hirschman really stood out in those congressional hearings we all watched because he was very blunt and often darkly amusing in the way he described the wildly chaotic final few weeks of the Trump administration. What we now know is that a federal grand jury has issued a subpoena seeking both documents and testimony from Hirschman as part of the Justice Department's probe into the January 6th attack on the Capitol, as well as the events leading up to that attack. It's always significant whenever a lawyer or a senior White House official gets called in by the Justice Department, and I would expect there to be some sort of legal back and forth, potentially litigation, over just how broad the grand jury can go when it's asking questions and seeking documents from Hirschman. What I would think there will be arguments about, and I don't want to predict how these arguments will go, are issues related to attorney-client privilege, since Hirschman was providing legal advice to Trump. He's a lawyer. And also issues related to executive privilege, which of course is not unlimited. It's not a, get out of testimony free card, but it is an important part of how White Houses work. So this isn't the end of the conversation, but it's a really important big step on DOJ's part.
This is a huge step. Thank you for breaking that down for us, Betsy. Okay, we also know that there was another bombshell report, and this time this came from the Washington Post, and that report could show that Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election were even more wide-ranging than we knew. The Washington Post says that newly obtained records show that Donald Trump's legal team hired computer experts to breach voting machines and copy the hard drives of election servers in at least 3 battleground states. And those states are Georgia, Nevada, and Michigan. Glenn, is this illegal? It doesn't seem on the up and up to me.
Simone, there are so many spokes in what I, as a former career prosecutor, see as a hub and spoke conspiracy. We think of conspiracies more as a pyramid, like the mafia, right? You've got the Don, you've got the consigliere, you've got the underbosses and the capos and the wise guys, and it looks like a pyramid. What I see emerging, though, based on all the evidence, is a hub and spoke conspiracy, another accepted model of conspiracy in the criminal law, where you got a hub, one guy right in the middle. Who is that? Well, that's Donald Trump. And then a whole bunch of criminal spokes radiating out from that hub, all sort of trying to accomplish the same goal: keep Donald Trump in office unlawfully, in fact, unconstitutionally. And now the false electors and the seizing of election machines, all of these spokes are radiating out. And here's what I think we have to realize: there's stuff going on behind the scenes. I predict there are people flipping right now that we know nothing about. And I often point back to the fact of the great reporting that we learned about in recent weeks, that the Department of Justice had obtained Mark Meadows' cell phone records back in April. And what a treasure trove of evidence they must be. And we knew nothing about it for months and months. I suspect the DOJ wheels are turning behind the scenes in ways that we will learn in the future.
Well, Glenn, I think you make a good point. And frankly, if I know Betsy Woodruff Swan, she is out there trying to get those details, honey, so she can write a piece about it. Betsy Woodruff Swan, Glenn Kirschner, thank you very much.